Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Media Talks TV with your host Tony J. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe, click the like, and share. Keep my videos in the algorithm. Make sure you hit that like, man. We're in another segment. We're back with another segment of retrospectives. Today is the 30th anniversary of one of the most iconic hip hop albums to come out, uh, called The Shinin'. If you don't know that album, I suggest you check it out. It was one of the greatest albums. Um, it came out in 1995, and it kind of changed the trajectory with hip hop. You know, there are a couple of albums that came out between 1994 and 1995. And most of the time when you think about that era, of course that was the Biggie and the Notorious B.I.G. era and the Nas era. But, you know, like a lot of hip hop acts of the mid 90s, there was so many albums that came out between 1994 and the period of 1997 that kind of redefined the East Coast sound. And out of all of those albums, some of those albums didn't really get widely recognized. And Boot Camp Click was one of those groups that really was on the underground and never really seemed to get to the same level of stardom as maybe Wu Tang Clan or many other super groups of that time, or the Funk Squad, or the the that kind of like that split between EPMD, where Eric Sermon had his artists having putting out solo albums, and PMD uh had his artists putting out their own solo albums. And with all of that, between the stardom of Redman coming out, uh, what's that other cat's name? Well, of course, Eric Sermon had his own albums, and then Keith Murray coming out during that time that year, and also Mobb Deep, of course. You know, Boot Camp Click really was kind of like on the fringes. They had a good following, but they didn't have the major fandom that Biggie Smalls had at that time. And like so many other rap groups that came out of New York, Biggie kind of just eclipsed a lot of artists that were coming out of the East Coast at that time and coming out of New York, because it was just a large influxes, a large slew of artists that came out during that time. And, you know, between, Black Moon, that first album, Into the Stage with Black Moon, kind of set the tone. Into the Stage set the tone for Boot Camp Click, because that was the first album that actually set up the popularity for Timberland boots and army fatigue that was starting to become a popular thing in hip hop. So when Boot Camp Click came out with with Black Moon, which was one of the groups, when they came out with Who Got the Props in '93, it everybody wanted to wear Timberlands. Everybody wanted to wear North Face jackets, and and bubble goose jackets. And that era, between the era of the bubble goose jacket and the army fatigue and the lumberjack jackets and stuff like that, there was a lot of that going on in hip hop at that time. Baggy jeans and knapsacks and shit like that. Like that really defined and set the tone for hip hop in the mid 90s. And no other group was doing that besides maybe Black Moon, Boot Camp Click, which is part of the Boot Camp Click, and also Onyx and Redman. So they were making statements with their music, but they were making fashion statements as well. So you had rappers now starting to make fashion statements with their music. So that helped get artists a lot more clothing deals. So everybody started wearing bubble goose jackets. So everybody started wearing Mecca and Tommy Hilfiger because of Biggie. And then Fubu came, of course. And they had the Fubu Scully cap. So Queen started influencing hip hop in a lot of ways. But there was no other groups out there that were influencing the underground scene in New York than maybe Gangstar and Boot Camp Click. And then Boot Camp Click uh was one of those groups that of course comprised of several artists on their label, and the label Duck Down. And that was, of course, Helter Skelter was one of them. That was it was Helter Skelter, Original Gun Clappers, Black Moon, and the one group Smiff and Wesson, which I'm talking about today. Smith and Wesson, Original Gun Clappers, all those groups were housed under Boot Camp Click. And Smith and Wesson was a very unique group because at one point Smith and Wesson actually got sued by the gun company. And because there was pending litigation, in order for them to make more records, they had to change their name to Coca Brothers. And when they put out their second album, their sophomore album, 90, I believe it was 98, they couldn't go under the name of Smith and Wesson for a long time until they settled that pending litigation between Smith and Wesson because they said it was a trademark infringement. And then on top of that, when they released the Shinin, a lot of samples didn't get cleared on that album. And of course, they had to clear those samples. They if you don't know which songs there were, there's a lot of samples that had Roy Ayers music in it. And of course, when you clear a sample, you have to make sure that the artist that created that original work gets fully compensated for it. So there was pending litigation between that, but they still put the album out anyway. So, but um The Shining was an interesting album, and it would I would call it quintessential boom bap. And what I mean by quintessential boom bap rap is that it has the beat miners really put together the sound that would define Brooklyn hip hop, because Brooklyn never really had a definitive sound until the mid 90s. Um and I think out of all the people that get talked about the most, the beat miners never really get talked about as a great production team because they did a couple. They did a couple of albums. Um, And out of all of them, besides that Premier, DJ Premier, Large Professor, all these guys, and even to a certain extent, Lord Finesse. Lord Finesse is a producer as well. People don't even really know that. But out of all of those, the beat miners are rarely talked about in hip hop. But they they really define quintessential boom bap rap music, and the edginess of the album. What I like about it is it felt like the street when you listen to the album. And of course, one of my favorite songs on there is Bucktown. Bucktown was one of my favorite. I think I played that 3 or 4 times when I first got the album. Um, it really had this urban appeal to it, and I even saw the music video too. The music video was even better because you got a real understanding of Brooklyn as being a war zone, and there were no other groups like people. When people think of hip hop, they think of the Bronx and Harlem. But when Brooklyn came out with its own sound, which it took years for Brooklyn to mature their sound to where it is, it wasn't just Biggie, and I feel like a lot of people like they look at Biggie and say, well, he put Brooklyn on the map, but he was a part of it. But it there wouldn't be a Brooklyn sound if it wasn't for the beat miners, and if it wasn't for the boot camp click and what the work that they were doing. They're just getting their accolades. But what's so interesting about them is they had a large following underground. They weren't like, they didn't have that major record label following. So, you know, that album really defined the sound for what we know as the Brooklyn sound. You know, the boom bap, that hardcore street street edge rap music, street edge sound that most times isn't really widely known. Now Queens got the most lyrical MCs, but when it comes to the sound that really defines the New York sound has always been Brooklyn. It's always been Brooklyn. And Brooklyn, the beat miners really put New York on a map, and they would really put the Brooklyn sound out there as being distinctive from, say, the Uptown sound, because the Uptown sound is very vastly different from the Brooklyn sound. Queens Queens is different. Queens is a lot more lyrical. Of course, I've already said that, but Brooklyn has just been known to be edgy, and that's what that album was all about. Um, One of the things that I know about Boot Camp Click, because I was rather young when I first started listening to their music, maybe 13, 14 years old. Uh, it was something unique. Boot Camp Click is known for posse cuts. And if you don't know what a posse cut is, you might want to go back to, like, say for instance, um the Juice Crew, Wu Tang Clan, Tribe Called Quest's Scenario. Um, Out of all their albums, they Boot Camp Click made a lot of posse cuts. Same thing with Digging in the Crates crew. They made posse cuts. And then, once they made a whole bunch of posse cuts, they broke off and made individual artist records. So they set the tone for a lot of the rappers on their label that had their own solo albums. And that's why we got the album from Helter Skelter, La Flor, Iskoshka, I think is an esoteric song from Original Gun Clappers. So that was in '97. So we had a lot. Boot Camp Click really produced a lot of good singles, and even today, it's coming up on 35 years since Boot Camp Click has been around. Well, Duck Down Records actually, you know. So they've really produced a large body of work, but they don't get the same accolades as other labels. So this has just been another retrospective with Mia Talks TV. I'm Tony J. I'm getting up out of here. Be sure to listen to The Shinin. Be sure to listen. It's on Spotify. Very good album. It's timeless. Make sure you hit that like on the way out. Make sure you subscribe. It's been another Media Talks TV. I'm out. Peace.